How are you today?
Pretty good. Wish I could be outside. It's so nice here. But I'll
Yeah.
get out later.
Where do you live?
Just across the bay in Bar Harbor.
Sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, it was hot here yesterday. It got humid in the evening.
It's been
Yeah.
super hot on the peninsula today,
Mm.
I think. What
I
about Desile?
love it.
You love it.
What's that?
Did you say you love it, Noelle?
I do. I really love the heat. It feels so good. I feel like my body has needed to thaw, like I've still been holding the winter cold. So it feels good to thaw. We've had all the windows open in the office and like making updates in the nature shop. So getting the summer feels.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. How long have you been on MDI, Connor?
Well, I moved here in 2013 to go to College of the Atlantic, and then I ended up staying my first summer. As a first year, I worked for the college, and then I just ended up staying every summer since, and been here year round since. So this is my 9th year. But yeah,
That's great.
can't complain. There's
Yeah.
not enough time to do everything I want to do here, so I'm kind of just spending each year getting into new things, and it's been great. Yeah, and it's nice.
Have you ever
What's that?
have you ever found a sea marble?
Oh yeah, all the time, but
All the
not as much
time?
as I'd like to.
I've only ever found one, and it's still like one of my prized possessions. I can't believe you
Definitely,
find them
yeah.
all the time.
You got to go to certain spots where there might be more of a chance of them occurring. They don't just appear anywhere. But there's places down south where there's way more marbles than up here. Wasn't as much of a culture of kids playing with marbles on the beach here as there were in other places, like down near Portland or where there's sandy beaches. It's kind of common for kids to take marbles to the beach and make sand tracks and then play with them there. And I did that as a kid, and we lost some of the marbles. So there's places also where there's a beach bordering a playground or an amusement park. And especially down south, like in the Chesapeake Bay, there's lots of marbles down there. There's all kinds of dumps that are just eroding on the coastline. There's tons of marbles in there. Not as much here. Another way they can get into the ocean is in spray paint cans. There's a marble inside of that. Some people would throw those away and they get eroded out. What time is it? Is it almost time to?
You're almost time. We have about 4 minutes. We'll give people, I guess, a couple more minutes to log on, and then Noelle and I will do some introductions, Connor, and then kind of let you take it away.
Cool.
And then I have a feeling people are going to have questions at the end. So if we want to save like 5-10 minutes.
Yeah.
For that.
We'll try to go quickly so we can get to the questions, because I love talking to people and I love hearing the questions too.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like you know so much and you have so much information. You could teach a whole class on this
Thanks. Yeah.
Be really cool.
Well, I'm definitely not an expert in that sense. Like there's always more to learn. And I feel like the deeper I get, the more I'm like, oh geez, I don't know much. But
that's kind of the way
I had a lot of great mentors and friends who also I get to bounce ideas off of, and friends who I've introduced to Seaglass who went on to create really amazing collections themselves. So to have people who are participating in it with me, that's definitely part of how I kind of accumulate all this understanding, is people coming, showing me stuff or talking ideas.
Sure.
So that's really exciting.
Someone in the chat box, Connor, said, oh, sorry, Noelle.
Okay.
Over you. Someone in the chat box said that they found a tiny porcelain doll leg and some buttons as well.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, I was hoping to be able to share my screen. Oh, let's see. This isn't gonna work, but I have this little. I don't know. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Whoops. Yeah, if I was able to get it to share screen on my mobile device, then I would take you into all the drawers and things I have. But this is, you can see there's a couple buttons.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
See that?
Yeah.
Those are actually made of nacre shell. they're probably carved out here in Maine.
That's so
That was a
Whoa.
big industry back then. And this is actually a rare shell. It's kind of hard to see. It's called Gould's Pandora.
Oh yeah.
It's a little clam, and this one has both sides. It's really rare to find them in general, but to find one that's entire is really special. That's the only one I've ever found.
That's so cool.
Here's another. This, I don't even know what this shell is, but every time I find one, I'm amazed by it because it has these beautiful ridges that get worn out and it leaves this color. I call it jailhouse clam because it's like those stripes. But this one, not as worn.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can see it has. Here's another one.
That's
Wow.
so cool. I don't think I've ever seen one of those.
Yeah, you know, I've been looking in many different books to try to find what it is. I think it's like an offshore clam that just somehow gets washed up, or either that or it's just a rare species that's been in decline. But it's definitely, I've never found one much larger than a quarter. Here's another small one.
Yeah.
I think I have a really small one. This one's like smaller than my nail.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, tiny sand dollars and things. Little shells are my favorite
Oh,
to
that's
find.
so cute.
Yeah. They call this a 10-ridged whelk, or I think Neptune's whelk also. This is
Ooh,
a small one. They usually get bigger than this.
so cool. Thanks for sharing from
Yeah.
your actual collection. That's really cool.
Oh yeah. Like I said, if I could get this camera to work, I was hoping to show you. I've got these drawers. This is one way that I store everything,
wow.
and it really helps to have it all flat laid like that. That way I can just go look at stuff.
That's
and I hope
That's
Great.
amazing.
Yeah, I've got a really big one right here.
Whoa.
That is just, I'm still working on filling it, but you know.
That's amazing. That's so cool.
Those are old spool chests that they used to keep spools of silk and thread in. Whenever you go to the store to buy, you would see those.
Wow, you're such a wealth of knowledge. So cool. So, Connor, someone in the chat box said that there's
Thank
a
you.
Florida. Oh, you're welcome. Florida Facebook group known as the Shellinators, and the administrator might be able to help identify some of your shells. Was a comment from someone.
Okay.
And I just want to let
Awesome.
everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to let everyone know that it's 4 p.m. and we're going to get started. We'll do some introductions and then pass it over to Connor. If you would like to say where you're from, I noticed we have somebody from Southwest Harbor, and I'm sure we have people from all over. So if you'd like to put your name and where you're from and maybe why you're interested in this particular topic in the chat box, we would love to hear from you since we can't see all of your lovely faces. If this is your first webinar with us, this is a Friends from the Field series co-hosted by Blue Hill Heritage Trust, where I am the outreach coordinator, and Island Heritage Trust, where Noelle is kind of my counterpart over there. We've been doing this series for 2 years now. I think it's been, full 2 years, and we have a big archive of past videos if you'd like to check other ones out. And thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass it over to Noelle to give a little tech help and tell you how we're going to do Q&A, and then I'll introduce Connor.
The phone is taking a message. Hold on.
Okay. Okay, I can introduce Connor first.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Sorry, that was awful timing in the office. Hi, everyone. I'm Noelle. I'm with Island Heritage Trust of Deer Isle, Stonington. So excited to have you here and for this conversation with Connor. Connor's really excited to do Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box, and Lander and I will field those at the end of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Noelle. I'm sorry you had 2 phone calls in a row. That is bad timing, but I think you got everything in. And if you have questions about the tech or Q&A, feel free to put them in the chat box and we can address those. But we're so excited to have Connor here tonight. Really, in my opinion, expert beachcomber. He did a lot of studies on seaglass and beachcombing at College of the Atlantic, where he went to college, and he's still out on MDI, looking around the islands and learning so much. And he's going to be sharing some of his journey with us today. And he has a ton of collections. I don't know if you got a sneak peek before, a few minutes ago, before other people were arriving, on his amazing collections in the drawers behind him. But he's also, and maybe he'll talk about this, but he's going to do an exhibition out on MDI where the old Oceanarium used to be. And so if you want to go see his collections in person, you'll get a chance to do that, I think, this summer. So maybe Connor will talk about that. And he's also done exhibitions in museums and libraries and Seaglass festivals. So his stuff is definitely out there. And I actually have a beautiful bracelet that I have right here, which was a piece that he found a long, long time ago. So thank you, Connor, so much for being here tonight. And we look forward to what you have to share with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Lander. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Blue Hill Heritage Trust. I'm kind of rusty. I haven't done a talk on Seaglass in a while, so excuse me for public speaking if I just have like a couple brain dead moments, but we'll just start right off. This photo is just kind of like the cover screen. It's dead crab Seaglass. If you're familiar on Instagram with hashtags, that's one of the Seaglass hashtags that a lot of people post in, but posing your Seaglass finds with a dead crab is pretty fun. Let's see. So I grew up in Ipswich, Massachusetts, which is a historic town, and that's kind of how I got into appreciating history. It was 1634, but there was lots of presence there before. But the beach there is sandy. There's no sea glass there. It's a lot of sand dollars, and I grew up on that beach combing for sand dollars. But then when I moved to Bar Harbor in 2013 for College of the Atlantic, I just kind of continued my regular going to the beach and looking for shells, looking for rocks, whatever caught my eye. And I discovered Seaglass there on the beach at College of the Atlantic, and Acadia Landing, which I've marked right there, is roughly where I found my first pieces of Seaglass. And that's now the College of the Atlantic campus. This is an 1890s map of Bar Harbor. You can see Bar Island and the fish weir, which was a fence to catch fish at low tide. And there's a low tide roadway. If you're not familiar with Bar Island, at low tide, there's a sandbar that opens up. You can walk across. This is a view from Bar Island across to, which is the current campus of College of Atlantic. But this photo was taken in the early 1900s, and you can still see Acadia Landing on the left. That's no longer there at all. Barely any trace of that except for that little covered house. And turrets, which is still there on the far right. In front of that, you might find some Seaglass. So this is the beach where I first found Seaglass. And before I get into some of the work that I've done, I just want to talk about some of the ideas, the philosophy behind beachcombing, which it's not just about collecting. I feel like one of the core aspects of beachcombing is beach time. A lot of beachcombers have a deep connection with the beach, and they go there for various reasons. But one of the reasons I go is just adventure, kind of getting outside, playing. It might be going with friends or going alone. I meet people on the beach sometimes, and I've made a lot of good friends through the beach, and I've kind of gained a whole community of people through beachcombing. And I've also had many experiences with wildlife that I otherwise wouldn't have had. For me, beachcombing is about just getting out there, and regardless of the weather, regardless of the tide, sometimes we're always thinking, oh, what's the tide? But I just try to go out there and just get moving. Sometimes you got to go a distance, but I'm fortunate to be close. I live within a mile of all the places that I go, so I can just walk or bike down to the beach and get right on there. But traveling is another big thing of beachcombing. A lot of people will travel far distances to go beachcombing, and it's fun to go other places to find treasure, but I try to stick to something that I feel a connection to. I don't really want to go somewhere necessarily. Beachcombing is also a journey long term. So all these other things, there's a sense of place when you get connected to the beach. You kind of have this routine. You become part of the routine of the beach. If you're going through there, you notice things. You have a deeper perception of the beach, and discovery. That's a really big part of the beachcombing for me. Every time I go to the beach, there's the potential of finding something that I've never seen, never even heard of, don't know anything about. And that really sparks my curiosity. And when I go home, I don't necessarily have to collect something, but I'll take photos, I'll do research, what I call homework. And some of the homework is sorting through my beachcombing finds. I'll just bring things home and dump them in a bucket. And then on Sunday or sometime when I have free time, when it's not as good weather or during the winter, I'll go through and sort them, clean them. And that's really when I start to notice some of the finer details and start to have more deeper thoughts about what is sea glass and stuff. So I'm just going to keep moving because I want to get to some of the other stuff, but I want to talk about this flotsam and jetsam. If you have a chance, look it up. It's a documentary just by the name Flotsam and Jetsam, really great documentary. And down below, I have a couple of different things. You can find more than just glass and things on the beach. Anyways, I want to talk more about some of the inspiration and people who are doing beachcombing work. And this webinar is dedicated to Ashley Bryan, who recently passed. But he was a big inspiration for me. I saw some of his exhibits at College of the Atlantic when I was a student there, and I was just blown away by the art that he was creating by beachcombed finds. And he also created these sea glass biblical scenes, stained glass windows using newspaper pulp. And you can see one behind him here. Another local who hopefully they're tuning in. I don't know if you're here, but big inspiration, someone I love to follow their work, Jen Buher. And I originally became connected with her work because I saw a piece of glass that I'd thrown in the ocean with a friend. She had found it and photographed it in one of these flat lays. So that was really cool to see someone find something that I knew. Mary McCarthy in Tillman Island was a really big mentor to me, and I spent a month down there with her beachcombing and talking sea glass. And some of the work that she does is with the North American Seaglass Association, but also this recently created beachcombing center, which originally started in Maine. A pair of sisters down in Saco started the Seaglass Center, which eventually evolved to the Beachcombing Center, which is a museum on Tillman Island in Maryland, and it is dedicated to beachcombing from all around the world, but also the history of beachcombing. So highly recommend checking that out. And Mary McCarthy's work, she's on Instagram, big blogger of sea glass. This is her business that she started in the beginning of the pandemic, when it's low tide. It's an upcycled candle business where she repurposes containers that she finds and hides a piece of sea glass in each candle. So when you burn it, you find something. It's kind of like the mystery, the discovery of the beach. You never know what you're going to get. This is an assemblage of things that I collected when I was down in Maryland with Mary. There's fossils, 15 million year old fossils. There's actually in the bottom middle, there's the Bangor, Maine Coke bottle, which was really cool to find something from Maine down in Maryland. And another inspiration, big person in the beachcombing world is this Deacon Ritterbush, Dr. Beachcomb. She hosts the International Beachcombing Conference. And her writings are mainly about the philosophy of beachcombing, how it's something that you can kind of have throughout your life, and it's an approach to life. And another author and educator in sea glass is Ted Sandling, mudlarker in London on the River Thames, which historically mudlarks were people who collected things that were thrown overboard or lost in the mud from the trade. And they were basically scavengers. But nowadays, mudlarkers are kind of like historians and archaeologists who go out just beachcombing on the tidal banks of the mud there, and they find all kinds of treasures. And London in Fragments is a really great book that details the history of some of these finds that Ted has brought up. And one of these quotes from the book is really cool. It's about how when you find a piece on the beach, it's kind of like it has a spark of life to it. It's the first time it's been seen or handled by some human, and it was deposited by somebody. So there's that connection. And this Richard Lamont, he's considered to be kind of the authority in sea glass. He wrote Pure Seaglass, which is the most comprehensive book, and also the Lure of Seaglass, which also talks about one of the reasons, or the many reasons why people get into beachcombing and how seaglass can have higher meanings than just a piece of glass and something that you found on the beach. Richard Lamont went on, he was one of the founding members of the North American Seaglass Association, which basically came about to combat, there was a artificial seaglass being created in the early 2000s, and people who were appreciated seaglass, they wanted to have some kind of organization of people who were all like-minded and basically provide a knowledge base and a forum for collectors, and try to educate people as to why artificial seaglass is not the way to go and genuine is something to appreciate. One thing here that I want to talk about is seed or seeded glass, which is intentionally throwing glass in to try to create sea glass. And we can talk about that more later, but it's kind of a maybe good, maybe bad practice, not sure. So this is some sea glass jewelry. Why does sea glass have value? Because it can be made into jewelry. So that one reason people were making fake sea glass was because they could sell it to jewelers who thought it might be real and they could turn around and sell it. But it's important to have genuine sea glass because that's where the value is. This chain was made by Luke Hartman on Deer Isle, and the pendant was made by Lisa Hall. I hope either of them may be tuning in, but both amazing artists in the sea glass world and local to Maine here. So getting into finding sea glass, one of the places you should start is historically active waterfronts. This is a postcard image of Bar Harbor in the early 1900s. You can see how many pilings and piers there were there. Lots of stuff potentially thrown over there. So when you're looking for beachcombed objects, there's the saying in geology, like sediment sorted with like sediment. So similar size and similar density is going to be sorted in a similar area. So if you're looking for sea glass, you want to look in places where those types of sediments are tending to accumulate. And if you see anthropogenic sediment, which is anything that comes from humans, so it could just be pieces of plastic, anything. When there's one, there's more. So if you find a piece of sea glass, you got to look deeper. There's a chance of more. Let's see how so we got 16 minutes. Sorry. So when you're on the beach looking for sea glass, there's gravel pockets and tidal banks, which is where sediments accumulate. And if you kind of focus your efforts into those spots, there's a higher chance of finding things. And also using evidence of the past as a guide to help you look for places where there might have been things left. If you remember back to that map earlier with the fishware, you can see in this photo, there's actually still pegs coming out of the sediment there. Those still exist today if you were to walk around there. So anywhere, even in your local coast, there's a good chance of finding old pilings if you look really closely on the beach. And that's evidence of there could have been a pier there or some kind of landing, and may have been things thrown over there. You can also find evidence of the past through stories and books, not just photos. And I just want to talk about also what I consider the original beachcombers of Bar Harbor, the Wabanaki, the native people who were there and still are. And they actually called Bar Harbor Manasedic or Abesic, which is related to their beachcombing activities of gathering clams and cooking on the beach. So we're gonna go beachcombing. We just woke up really early at the crack of dawn, got in our kayak. You don't need a kayak or any special gear to go beachcombing. You can just be walking on the beach. Having a boat, though, can help you get access to places that otherwise not as many people are going or not accessible by land. So this is a quick video here. This is in the winter. We're gonna start in the winter. Best time to go out is in the winter in Maine because there's not as many tourists and the storms are bringing stuff up. But sometimes there's a layer of fresh water on the surface of the ocean and it freezes over. Here I am testing the ice. So I hope you can hear the audio well, because there's a lot of good sensory sounds in here. This is on the tidal flats at Bar Island. Not as much exposure there to look for sea glass when it's covered in snow. Sometimes you can spot a piece that's just peeking out. And this one's really cool because it had a piece of seaweed growing on it. So strong. Let's see if you can spot the pieces before I pull them out. This is one of my favorite pieces to find, and I'll talk more about it later. And you'll see through the course of this video, there's quite a few of them brought up. A nice chunky bottle bottom. So we're getting closer to spring now. Things are melting a little bit. So when I first found these, I didn't know what they were. So I just kind of created a nickname for them. And they look like gumdrops, but they're just kind of these nubby things. That's what I ended up calling them. Nubs or nubbies. Very affectionately. It was like a little nickname that I called them before I knew what they were. And then it just stuck, and now that's what I call them. Here's one that just escaped the incoming tide. It had dried out. Just about to reclaim, but I see it there. This was an exciting find. I never looked. I don't have Facebook, so I didn't look on their Facebook, but I still have this rock. I love this rock. This is a piece of feather edge blue. It's really worn. You can barely tell what it is. At first I thought this was a salt shaker, but it's actually a spigot from a watering pot for like a garden watering. There's a nice, really chunky blue. You can see this piece very similar to the size of sediment that it's in. Another big chunk. So if you're looking for the nice, big, chunky things, you're more likely to find them in a place that has gravel size stones. Cobble beaches, they don't have as much because the things just fall to the bottom and they're not as visible. There's a flawless bottle stopper. Doesn't get better. But they're not all perfect. Sometimes we call that a crier because it's almost sometimes I just get distracted by beautiful things that aren't sea glass on the beach. And this was some kind of green algae or something that the way it was dripping was just mesmerizing. Warming up. Here's another nubby. Oh. Sometimes wake up before the birds. If you know your sediment, you'll know that's sand beach. This color I don't find much of. And that's a really nice piece of it. So I just want to say these video clips are over years of, I don't film most of the finds, but I've got clips of some of my favorite finds. And the chance of finding some of this is only maybe a few pieces like this per trip. And these are quite rare. I often don't find any. But one day I found 6 on one beach. That's the most I've ever found in one. One of my friends found 8 in one day on multiple beaches. So we're kind of competing for who can find the most. And they've become somewhat of a currency between some of my beachcombing friends. Here's a really good one. So a lot of beachcombers call these kick-ups. That's one day, a few hours of combing, and probably miles of walking across multiple beaches and different pockets. That's a nice green. I usually go tide pooling when there's good spots. It's always amazing to find wildlife. I thought this was a dog at first, but it's actually, I think, a cat paw. And I ended up finding another one a couple weeks later. I was hoping I'd find the head someday, but I haven't. So when I find these and they're partially buried, the way I spot them is from texture. I'm usually looking at the rocks, kind of gazing at the rocks and letting my eyes wander. And when I spot a certain texture, I know it's sea glass. And sometimes you can see that texture just through a peak. When I find a really perfect piece, I'll bring it home and it will bypass the sorting pile and go straight to the special pile. Here's a special nubby. These colors are not as common here. This lighter green. And that's especially well worn. This is a cornflower blue, another lesser common blue color. Another nubby, that one looks just like a rock. But when they're wet, they can be easier to spot. So going out in all different conditions helps your eyes develop, but also gives you a chance of finding different things. And that can influence the colors and how you spot them. Sometimes on like a dry day, it's harder to spot white, or harder to spot greens on a wet day sometimes. There's another nubby. Sometimes the light is just hitting them perfectly, so I'll take a moment to admire it. And this one turned out to be flawless. You can see there's a little bit of the rim left, but otherwise perfectly worn. It's a big round bottle bottom. Perfect nubby. I wasn't sure what this crab was doing at the time, but then I went home, did some homework, and found out that crabs make bubbles like this when they're stuck on land, and it helps them breathe, passes oxygen over their gills, and they can breathe out of water that way. See a lot of deer on the shore. Another perfect nubby. I found over 200 of these, and still finding more. Each one of them represents one whole bottle because there's only one of them on a bottle, and we'll get to that later. That's a smooth periwinkle. Sometimes they're yellow like that. Other times they have orange stripes. I actually have one right here. If you can see, there's little orange. That's some blue willow. That's a baby hake. That I found stranded on the beach, and I ended up putting it back into the water. Another round bottom bottle. There's some the beach cleanup crew. Very ancient organism, commonly known as springtails or colembla. You might see them floating on tide pools. This day there was hundreds of sea stars washed up. Sometimes I'll save a crab from a seagull. Other times I'll just watch them eat it. Moments like these is the reason I go beachcombing, really. Just enjoying being out there, being present. A lot of worries just get released when I'm on the beach. And now we're going into night mode, which is, if you've never been night combing, it's a whole different experience. And highly recommend it. It's definitely a good way to find things and notice things that you otherwise wouldn't. Bring a really powerful flashlight and you get focused in a particular area. and you can kind of control the sun in that way. So you can angle the light in any way, which helps you spot things in the sediment. And there's all kinds of activity at night that you might otherwise not see. It's usually very quiet and calm at night as well, not as windy. At least when I go out. That's a big one. Like I said, you can move the light around, which really helps catch the glass in different ways. Another benefit of going night combing is it works with your schedule better. Sometimes you're just doing things all day, or the tide is not in your favor, and the nighttime tide is good enough. There's been times where I've woke up really early to go beachcombing, or I stay up late, or I'll wake up in the middle of the night to go out because I feel like the conditions are going to be good. That's usually why I go out. I'm just kind of following a feeling that's pulling me out there. I don't really plan it around the tides as much. Although I go at low tide, I'm never planning far ahead on the tides. I try to go at any time, any tide, because there's always a chance of finding something. Sometimes sunlight can't pass through Seaglass. You need flashlights to illuminate it. And that's actually the moon setting and the sun rising after a night of night combing. Another flawless nubby. That one's very smooth. No rim visible. It's like a gumdrop. This is a whole bottle. The bottles that nubbies originate from. You can't really see it, but it's in there on the bottom. And that's the end of the video. So how do I go from finding stuff on the beach to assembling it into something like this? I do my homework, got to bring it home, put it in a bucket, organize it. And I create little assemblage, dead crab, Seaglass type things. I try to just throw it all in a bin, find my favorite pieces and organize them into something that is visually appealing, eye candy. Marbles and bottle stoppers. So one thing I want to talk about is the color and the chemistry of glass. And there's different elements added to glass to color it. And soda lime glass, which is the main source of most of the Seaglass that we find and makes up the majority of bottles and tableware glass. It's pretty basic, and actually the ingredients to make it can all be obtained through the beach. And the soda, which is sodium carbonate, it helps lower the melting temperature of silica, which is kind of the main thing. A lot of people know silica as quartz, but you can just get crushed up sand off the beach, use soda ash as a flux to lower the melting temperature of silica, and then add calcium oxide. And all of those fuse together to create soda lime glass. But there's other impurities or different trace elements in the glass, oftentimes as a result of the sand that was used. So there's little bits of things in there. And those kind of impart color to glass. So common glass made from basic sand is brown or green, and they have to add other elements that they call decolorizing. So, or decoloring. And it's important because the chemistry of glass has changed decade to decade. So understanding the chemistry of glass and colors is one of the first steps in helping you organizing sea glass and understanding the history of the origins of it. So on the left, top left, there's the photo of the Seaglass color swatch, which is the best, and it's no longer in print, sadly. So they're difficult to find, but they're created by the Italian Seaglass Association, and it's got a whole spectrum with real photos of real pieces. So if you can find that, it's definitely the best color guide. And down on these bottom two photos on the left, when glass, we think of glass as something that's stable, but it decomposes when it's exposed to different environments and certain conditions. It reacts. And one of the ways it reacts in a low acidic environment, low pH acidic environment, is this Benicia iridescence. Kind of creates that rainbow sheen. And the reason that happens is because of the glass breaking down into flakes microscopically on the surface, and the light refracting in those flakes is what creates that rainbow effect. So that happens often. It's also called sick glass when it's in an acidic environment like mud or something. So you don't find that in sea glass as much because sea glass gets conditioned in a different way in a high pH alkaline environment. The ocean's around 8 or 8.1, which is alkaline. So when sea glass when glass is exposed to the ocean, it degrades by pitting rather than flaking. And that's because of this reaction with the alkaline environment. Basically what happens is sodium is bonded with hydrogen from the water, and this is a process called hydration. So the glass is getting hydrated, sitting in the water, and the pH of the water affects how this works. So if it's a high pH, it's going to create pitting, and the glass is going to degrade in a way that makes that characteristic frosted appearance. A lot of people think it's just tumbling that creates that frosted appearance, but it's actually more significantly hydration, which leads to that frosted appearance. And hydration is what allows sea glass to break soft and tumble and wear down. So there's the weathering of sea glass, which is the chemical conditioning by corrosive forces. So that can be the pH or temperature, light exposure to different water. And then there's also the physical conditioning, which is the sea glass getting tumbled physically. And so the weathering is chemical, condition is physical. And this color is one of the most sought after colors. It's often called sun colored because it originally was colorless. And like I said earlier, glass needs decolorizing agents. So historically they used manganese to turn glass from a green color to clear. But around World War I, there was disruptions in the manganese trade essentially, and which forced glassmakers to move on to decolorizing with a different element, they went on to selenium. And nowadays they use other things. But the glass that was decolorized with manganese was mostly made in the 1800s up until the early 1900s and pretty much ceased production by 1920s. So when you find a color that's this, what they call sun colored, or this purple glass, you can be sure that it's over 100 years old typically. And it degrades this color by exposure, weathering, chemical reactions in the glass from the manganese exposure to sunlight, and creates manganese oxide essentially, which changes the color from clear to this purple color. These two bottles on the left are the same bottle. This is the Kibo Springs, which is out of Bar Harbor. And both of these bottles were presumably made around the same time. They're pretty much identical, other than the fact that they are different colors. One of them is sun colored. You can see that one on the left has a purple tint, and the other one's clear still, it's colorless. But that's probably because they've had different paths of exposure. One of them was not exposed to oxygen and light, and the other one was. So the purple one had more oxygen and light exposure. So it degraded over the past 107 years to that purple color. Depending on the amount of the manganese or the amount of the exposure, it can get to a really deep color. So how do you know what colors come from what? Well, it's researching bottles is really the best way to get into understanding sea glass. And these green shards all came from the same beach. They're roughly the same thickness and same hue. They might not all be from the same original container, but good chance that they are, because I haven't found much of this on that beach otherwise. But you can see in the top of my hand, there's a little handle, which all these shards, I believe, came from a gallon jug, and that green handle was the tip of the jug. I don't have one on hand, but like a maple syrup gallon, they used to have all kinds of things bottled in glass, essentially vinegars and oils. So this is possibly from a gallon jug. Now I want to talk more about these nubbies, as I call them, which are a lot of times called kick-ups in the sea glass collecting world, but they're not actually kick-ups. A kick-up is different than what those are. So I have this little slide about finding the words. This quote came from a book about moss that I was a big fan of. And with words at your disposal, you can see more clearly. Finding the words is another step in learning to see. So I didn't really know what to call these nubbies until I found the word for them, which came to this site, Historic Glass Bottles. And it's a really great site, but also there's many other sites online and books that can help in identifying bottles. But this one is really easy to navigate. There's tons of information. Definitely worth checking out if you're interested in the bottles. And in the glossary, I found this term, mammillon, which is this rounded eminence, a small circular protrusion found on the basal surface, usually at the tip of a push-up. Push-up is another term for kick-up. Kick-up base is an indented bottle base. And the reason they did that was because when glass is made into a bottle, it has a tendency to sag. So if they didn't kick up the base, then the glass, when it was still hot, would sag to the base and create a not really well-balanced base. So by kicking up the base, it assured that the base of the bottle would be stable. There's many other reasons people believe kick-ups were created, but it's kind of generally believed by glassblowers that it was done for the structural integrity of the bottle. So mammillons are not always in kick-ups. You can have a kicked up bottle base without a mammillon. And mammillons are a result of the molding process of these particular kinds of bottles. So this video, you can see the mammillon in this bottle that I pulled off the beach. That was the last clip in that other video. You can see the iridescence on it. So it's been exposed to an acidic environment at some point to gain that iridescence, but then it also was exposed to an alkaline environment to gain all those pitted soft marks that we think of sea marks on sea glass. Here's 2 examples of what these bottles may have been originally. This sparkling beer was an export. These bottles were mostly made in Europe and exported to the US. And they're not free blown bottles, which are bottles that are blown without the use of the mold. These are mouth blown bottles, but they were blown using molds. And the one on the right was presumably upcycled and reused by somebody here in Maine, this Nathan Wood and Son. They were a big bottler, I think out of Portland, but Wood's Neat's Foot oil is the label on this bottle, which may have originally been bottled as sparkling beer and then recycled into, because they're sturdy bottles, so it was common for them to reuse them. Neat's Foot oil is the oil of hooves pressed, so it was used as a lubricant for things. Here's some of the rougher nubbies or mammalians that I found, and on the left you can see the variability in the size of these bottles. The one on the left is really big. It might be something that you would have in a shop display, or you would break on a boat that as it was getting cast off for the first time. And the one in the middle is normal size. The one on the right is much smaller. Here's some of the perfect nubbies that I found. And you can see on the right, clear, not as dark green version of the bottle. You can see straight through to the nubby, the mammalian on the bottom. These are 2 other rare bottles, but interesting colors. The one on the left is a Capers bottle, and the one on the right is a Stickney and Poor's pepper sauce bottle. Both of these bottles are around the 1890s into the 1920s. The one on the left here is a orange crushed soda bottle, and those distinctive ridges are part of that bottle. They also made it in clear and other colors, but I think this label is really cool, how it has this special bottle to protect the delicate fruit flavors. The one on the right, I'm not sure what kind of bottle that was originally. It may have been a liquor or some kind of perfume. So getting into some of the pottery finds, here's a little frozen Charlotte or doll. This actually had wired on arms, which are, you can see they're missing, but they would have been movable from the wire. And this is a little dollhouse milk bottle. You can see it's pretty small compared to the barnacles. So getting into pottery, one of the first shards that really led me down the path of being interested in pottery, because I was initially entranced by the beauty of sea glass, but the potteries, the history of that is much more amazing in my opinion. This shard has all the information. It's the maker's mark on the back. It says Devonshire, which is the pattern name, and then semi-porcelain, which is the material it is, and then Samuel Ford and Co. England, so the maker and where it was made. So I was able to trace that shard back to the original plate, which through some searching I found online. I've never been able to find another one of these plates in all my antiquing. So it's quite a rare plate. It originated from 1890s. It wasn't made for that long. But over the years, I found many more pieces of it. And actually those 3 on the left, right above the one with the maker's mark, they all have maker's marks on the back. So there's at least 4 different plates of that dropped on the beach. Here you can see some of these shards. The one on the left, you can see the process of the transfer printing. They used metal engraved plates, transferred ink onto paper, and then transferred the paper, the ink laden paper, onto the porcelain and then glazed it. So you can see just on the left where the overlap of the paper with the pattern edge. Here's a really common, instantly recognizable pattern, blue willow. There's many different renditions over time, and it's one of those patterns that has scenes that each piece of the scene, once you become familiar with it, you can find a piece on the beach and instantaneously know, oh, this is blue willow. Here's a pattern that I found over 100 pieces of both the blue and the red, but I don't know much of anything about it, other than one day I was in an antique shop and I saw this pitcher, which my heart was just like, oh my God. And it's green, it's not blue or red. So it doesn't match perfectly, but it's the right size. Sadly, it doesn't have a maker's mark. So I don't know the pattern name other than a small initial of what the maker was, right? So I was able to figure out this was made around 1890 to 1920. But other than that, don't know anything about it. I just call it the blue flower. So I'm still working on trying to figure out that. This is a 12-sided teacup, which from my research I found this dates back to the 1840s. It doesn't have a handle, and that was a common fad, I guess, back in the 1840s, handleless teacups. But I actually was drawn to this teacup. I saw it and I didn't buy it, but then I went back, and I didn't buy it, and then I went back. And then one day I was just like, I keep getting attracted to this teacup. I might as well buy it, even though I don't know why I'm buying it. But then I brought it home and I had a piece of it somehow. Just thought, oh, maybe I should look through my drawer. Didn't even think of it at the time. Oh, maybe I have a piece of this. But it's a 12-sided teacup, and you can see on this shard, you can actually see part of that angled 12-sided, and it's double-sided shard. On the right side, it's the same shard, and the pattern on that on the interior. There's another shard on the left that I found that I just had for years, and it was a similar situation where I saw this picture, something attracted it to me, and I purchased it. It was $5 or something, brought it home, matched up perfectly. It was just something serendipitous that happened. Others involve much more research. This one was one that I knew I had pieces of some kind of floral scene, and I just look at floral pottery until it matched up. This one's called Thistle. And the one on the left here is Feather Edge Blue. It's another pretty common, not as common as Blue Willow, but instantly recognizable. Some of them not as recognizable. On the right, there's a piece that I wouldn't really know that that's from that pattern unless I had the plate. And at that point, I've had the plate, so I was familiar enough with the pattern to make that connection. But some of them are so worn down that they're not even recognizable. So this is a aesthetic era, which is, if you want to date pottery, there's different eras of the themes of pottery makers and what was in style. So in the 1850s to 1880s, there were different changing tastes, and aesthetic era pottery has miniature scenes, very floral, a lot of nature and geometric patterns. This one is a very precious plate, actually a Bar Harbor plate that, again, I found the plate in a shop and I was attracted to the plate, and I didn't realize I had pieces of it until I got it home. So sometimes they just match up perfectly like that. This is two different renditions of Blue Onion, which is another pretty common pattern. On the left, there's one maker's version, and on the right, there's another maker. And they had different patterns of the same design. So like Blue Willow, there's hundreds of renditions over time. So similarly, you can find the same pattern in different versions. This is a Asian, Chinese, or Japanese imported wares that were handmade, hand drawn on glaze, and very quickly done. So these were made for export specifically. And sometimes there's different ways to date these. If they have stamps on them, then you can date them past certain times when they required them to be stamped. If there's no stamps, then they're older generally. This ginger jar on the left is an example of something that was just quickly hand applied glaze. So all of these jars are different and unique, but when you find a piece of it, you can be pretty certain that it comes from a ginger jar, because they had these underlying themes and designs. This one on the right is doesn't wear down as much. It's called Phoenix ware, and I've never found very well rounded pieces of it. And in terms of pottery, a lot of people are familiar with glaze, but the body of the pottery is called paste. So I think the paste of Phoenix ware is much more resistant to the wear. This is a 1850s plate that I recently identified. And it was really popular at the time to have these ancient themes. This is another similar error. This is a piece that I found that I knew it came from some sort of jar, but I didn't know. Oh, are we past time?
No, you're good. It's just a little bit after. It's 5:04. So
Okay, well, this is like nearly the last slide, but
okay.
one of my buddies dug this jar and I was able to match it up. Here's another, I didn't know what this was and figured out it's Oriental toothpaste. I thought that said original and preserving or preferred, but it's Oriental and preserving. This is a really common Dundee marmalade. I guess I'll just go through these and then we can talk about questions. This, you can see the base of the pottery. There's different marks left by the way the potters shaped them. The one on the left is a pot that was pulled from the wheel with a twisted wire. And the one on the right is a molded pot. Eventually, once production was increased, they couldn't hand spin them. They had to just mold them. This is a German mineral water bottle, which the shard on the right, you can see these, what looks like fingernail marks, and the glaze is still left intact, which assures me that these are fingernail marks. Before the piece was glazed, the potter grabbed the wet clay, left a mark in there, and then glazed it. And the glaze was sheltered from the wear of the ocean in the fingernail mark. And the photo on the bottom, you can see the handprint of the potter left in the glaze. You can see like the ridges of a handprint. Sometimes I find pieces that just match up perfectly, like to the environment. This piece of sea urchin shell was right next to this. Salt glaze stoneware. The bottom left photo is a close-up of the texture of salt glaze stoneware. Bangor stoneware made salt glaze stoneware. These are the little pipes in the bottom were for inline electricity. They used to have just exposed copper wires that were running through the wooden beams of the basement, and they had to use some sort of insulator to keep them from burning down the house. And many of these ceramics were used as insulation. You can see some sheep fencing insulators where they would put wire on. Here's the piece that I recently matched up. I found that the small piece on the left just a couple weeks ago, and I had this other piece. When I brought it home, I realized they were a matching pair, and now I'm working on figuring out what this plate is. Still working on figuring out this cat. It's very detailed. And this is one of my pieces that I've had for so long that I know it comes from a pitcher and washing basin because of the angle of the ridge and the bowl. But I've never been able to find anything remotely like it. So hopefully someday I'll find that. All right, here's the question section.
I love that photo.
Thank you so much, Connor.
Yeah, I hope that wasn't too rambling.
No, it honestly felt like a meditation for me.
Awesome.
Like just like following you on your journey and then seeing you put these pieces together and bringing the history into it. I was, really inspired, and it was so peaceful. Thank you. And we do have a good amount of questions if
good.
you want to answer.
Yeah, I hope
some.
I inspired some trips to the beach and just more investigating.
I think you certainly did. A lot of questions, and we've been getting a lot of little heart emojis and smiley face emojis popping up on the screen. I don't know if you've been able
Good.
to see those. Yeah, Noelle, do you want to start with a question?
Yeah, I actually like the idea of just real quick. Someone asked, where can people find you on Facebook in case people need to leave? If you could just let people know where they could find you publicly. You said you're not on
Oh,
Facebook, so do you
yeah.
have
Well,
like
I'm not
a
on
public
Facebook, but
contact?
I'm on Instagram. That's the only social media I'm on, which my Instagram is mainly coastal, Maine, as in the state, Maine, and then LY, coastal. So can I like type that in? Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
I just sent that in the group chat, which I just realized I can see all the questions here.
Yeah, that's good. So you can browse it too.
Okay, yeah.
All right, let's see. Oh my goodness. I see a question here. We have a bunch, so it might be hard to get to all of them. But you could always reach out to Connor probably through his Instagram if you have follow-up questions, if that's okay with
Oh
him.
yeah, here, I'll put my email as well.
Thank you, Connor. That's really nice. There's one here. Let's see, from Heidi. What do you think is the most rare color to find? I've been told it's red. I have found a few pieces over the years, few and far between.
Well, red is definitely a rare color in glass, but orange is considered even rarer just because red was used for a variety of utilities like lenses on cars, like a Ford Model T had a red lens, and red lenses for railroad lights and stuff like that. And also red was used, red was made creating, red was created using gold. So that's one of the reasons why it's not as common, but actually they found methods to create red glass not using gold, like copper oxides and things. So there was a time when there was a beer, Schlitz, bottled in a ruby red bottle. It was kind of their distinct name brand bottle. And so it's common to find, not common, but if you find red, it's possibly from a Schlitz bottle, ruby red. But find a true red that's made with real gold, that's definitely less common. Orange is considered some of the most rare in glass just because it was not made in many tableware or anything like that. Bottles never were orange.
Great, thank you. A few people asking about marbles. One person asks, they've heard that marbles were used as ballast in ships. Is that why we find them on beaches? And another person says, a lot of marbles are from soda bottles. So could you share a little bit about marbles?
Yeah. So the marbles as ballast in ships, that definitely didn't happen here. And that could have happened some places. But I don't know any specific places. But one thing that was used as ballast on ships here in Maine was cobble. And many beaches that we don't even know really existed were completely harvested of their cobble and shipped down to Boston and places as ballast for on the way down. And then when they would come back up, they would unload all that cobble. But it was valuable to them because they could sell it for the cities for paving. But eventually they started quarrying cobblestones. But yeah, cod bottles are I have one somewhere. There's a form of bottle that used a marble inside of the bottle as a stopper, and actually the pressure of the carbonation of the drink would press the marble against the bottle, and then you would just press the marble down. That would open the seal. And there's a modern Japanese soda company that makes the same bottles, and so you can find those. But typically those were just clear marbles. They weren't art marbles or anything. They weren't like a fancy swirl. Those ones were just from kids playing or people depositing them. Sometimes marbles roll out of a gutter. They eventually reach the sea. I was talking earlier about how on sandy beaches, it's common to make tracks in the sand and play with marbles. So they just get lost there. or also if you have a beach that's nearby a playground or an old amusement park, greater chance of marbles there. And also, I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the video about seeded sea glass. Marbles are one of the most commonly seeded pieces of glass because everybody wants to find a sea glass marble. It's already well worn, so it's going to get quickly tumbled and frosted. Not that quickly because it does need time. But if you were to put a marble in a highly abrasive environment, then it would get pounded and look like sea glass in a few years. But it's not going to have the hydration that creates that real depth of frosting that you think of when you think of pure sea glass, which Richard Lamont, I didn't mention it earlier, but he's known for making this distinction between genuine sea glass, which is sea glass tumbled and softened on a beach, versus pure sea glass, which is antique glass that has a specific chemistry that's worn and exposed and weathered and conditioned. So that's pure sea glass. So I guess I kind of went away from the question there, but the sources of marbles are varied. I don't find as many marbles as people down in places where there's dumps and things. So that's another way of finding marbles. The beaches that I comb are not as dumpy as some of the places that maybe farther down south. In Maine still, you can find dump beaches there.
Thanks, Connor.
Yeah.
Another question we have here, and if you want to divulge this information, where is the best place to find sea glass on the coast of Maine, especially Acadia area?
Huh. Well, in terms of like Bar Harbor is a really great place to find sea glass, but it has been picked over pretty heavily. And you're also competing with me and a bunch of other people. So you gotta, part of finding it is just getting out there. The more you get out, the more chances you'll have of finding it. So I think people are always like, wow, how did you get all this? I actually spent a lot of time out on the beach, and it wasn't just, like I said, some of these pieces I just find one per trip, and then I end up having a big pile over years. But there definitely isn't super hot spots that I know of necessarily in Maine. I'm always looking for those, and most of the time people who know about those are pretty protective of them. And I also don't have a car, so when I do travel, it's not super on a whim. I don't really go too far other than places around here for combing. But down in Portland, anywhere where there's a city, any old historic waterfronts, places that are off the beaten path, essentially. And like I said, if you look on old maps, you can find places that might not be marked. And another thing to consider in Maine, Maine's one of the few states that landowners own to the low tide line. Most places in the US actually, landowners don't own that far into the shore. So if you're beachcombing in an unfamiliar area in Maine, you should be aware that you could be potentially trespassing through private property. But that, if you let that deter you, you might not find those secret spots. So you should just get out there and also be aware of that and ask permission when you feel like it's necessary. But I know Bar Harbor, Camden, Rockland, anywhere on the coast of Maine where there was old activity, really great spot. Portland.
Awesome. Thank you, Connor. Do you see any questions you would like to answer, or should Noelle and I keep going?
I'm just, let's see. Can you guys see me scrolling through here? Cobbles. What is a cobble beach? Cobble beach is in terms of the size of the beach sediment. So you could have a cobble beach that has bigger than a softball kind of size. So if a cobble beach, not the best for finding sea glass because the sediment that you would expect to find sea glass in is kind of buried beneath those larger rocks on a cobble beach. If you go to a gravel pocket on a beach, you're more likely to find. And what are the gumdrops from? I hope I answered that.
Connor, what about the newest question that came in, how far do you think most sea glass travels? Do you think if it's found in the Gulf of Maine, where did it come from originally?
Yeah, that's definitely a question people ask. One thing, like I mentioned earlier about how like sediments are sorted with like sediments, sea glass typically obeys the laws of, or not the laws, but just the nature of the geologic movement, essentially, or the way the sediments move. So if you look at a beach and you go there daily and you see how the sediments are moving, that's pretty much the extent of what sea glass travels. You wouldn't expect to find, it's not like a bottle's thrown away on an island and then washes up a mile away from that island. It's typically things are deposited there and kind of kept there. But another thing is glass is less dense than stone. So when the beach gets hydrated at high tide and there's just like a soup of stone and glass and there's tumbling and the wave action, it kind of shakes the glass to the surface in a sense. Like the glass floats, not really, but it's less dense. So a lot of the times when I'm finding sea glass, I'm not doing any digging. It's just surface combing and it's right on the top there because the most recent tide has kind of sorted it up to that point. But sea glass doesn't necessarily travel any farther than typical beach sediments do. So you could have a place where there's a lot of movement.
Thank you for answering that.
And I guess to answer the combing with a black light, don't comb with a black light. I don't have a powerful enough black light, and there's not enough UV reactive glass up here even to make that worth it. Plus some other things on the beach are UV reactive, so you would just kind of be noticing other stuff. But black lights are really cool, and sea glass can be UV reactive. And I actually have this piece, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that lime green color above that blue marble, that's bright UV. When you shine a UV light on it, it glows.
Oh, that's so cool. Connor, there's a question about, is there an app that you can take a picture of a find and it gives possible origins? Do you know something like that exists?
I don't know. That would be a cool thing. But one of the things about sea glass is sometimes it's so worn from its original form, you really can identify it without having that kind of background knowledge. And that's why getting into bottles and getting into pottery and kind of digging deeper into the history of that, I never expected to really get into some of these things that I got into through, as Beachcombing kind of introduced me to that. I actually got into collecting postcards, which I never thought I would, but because I was so fascinated by these postal print images of places that I knew. So, and that kind of led me down to another thing of just reading the backs and reading the messages of people's postcards. So kind of researching deeper will help you in identifying. And the app, that would be really cool, but hard to develop for sure. It's really hard to put together a comprehensive collection of sea glass knowledge and stuff like that. But the Beachcombing Center on Tillman Island, Mary McCarthy's the closest thing to that, I would say. Like if you were to go on Instagram, send her a picture of it, there's a good chance she'll know. But also having that community of people that you can put things out to be identified. And in terms of the shells, sometimes I know somebody mentioned earlier about identifying some of these shells that I didn't know. Sometimes I don't like to take that method or that what I consider the easy way of just putting it out onto the online, but I kind of wait or let it sink in and do deeper searching. What else? We got more questions?
Let's see. Maybe we could choose one more. We're so appreciative of you staying overtime, Connor, and I also want to be
Oh, I see Jen's here.
Dinner time. Yeah, she's been sharing a lot of resources.
Oh, thank you, Jen.
Cool. Noelle, do you see another question that would be fun to be our last one for tonight?
I do like this question from Patricia on why is it that maybe searching in one place there would be more milk glass and then searching in another, there would be more blue or purple. Like, why are there distinctive areas to find certain things?
Totally. Well, there won't be sea glass occurring without historic deposition. So just like in the same way today, where you might find somebody throwing trash in one spot, but not another spot, it's kind of similar back then. There might have been somebody throwing away a bunch of milk glass, and it just ended up there somehow. But going back to seeding, that's another, sometimes if you find a lot of one thing that kind of seems fishy, like if you go to a beach and there's just tons of marbles there and they're not really that worn, that's kind of an indicator if it's potentially deposited intentionally. Also vase fillers, which you see in like the bottom of a fish tank, you can buy them at Walmart. They're like flattened marbles. Those are another common form of seeding. Oh, thanks for the clamshell update. Yeah, so here's those shells, little clamshells. I have never found them bigger than this.
Cool.
So they might be, we'll save that.
Heidi's wondering, how do we keep all the info from today? In terms of the presentation, we are recording it and we'll send it out to people who have registered. So if you want to rewatch the presentation, that will be available to people. And thank you, Connor, for allowing us to do that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me here too. Yeah, and if anybody wants to get in touch with me through my email or Instagram, feel free to. And I have done in the past guided tours. I'm not like a licensed tour guide or anything. I don't have insurance, but I'm glad to plan a day with somebody. I can sometimes I might not respond for a bit, but I'll try to respond. And if you're coming to Bar Harbor or you're planning a trip, I'd be happy to meet up.
That's so nice of you and generous, Connor. So somebody just lastly was wondering if you had a book. Do you have one that's out? Like
I have a print book of some of my photos that was limited to 100 editions, and I have a few dozen left, and they're all going to be available at the Oceanarium, which if we didn't mention earlier, but the Oceanarium in Bar Harbor, I think it's at the head of the island. I'm not sure if it's in Bar Harbor, but it's on MDI and it's kind of like an ocean themed museum. They're going to be hosting a Seaglass exhibit that I'm still working on for them. We're not sure when it's going to go in, but sometime hopefully in the summer. It's going to be the biggest one yet. It's kind of every time I've done an exhibit, I have to upgrade it, and I've put a lot of effort into creating new content in the past few years. So hopefully this Oceanarium exhibit will be something like you've never seen before. And there'll be books there, and I also have postcard prints of some of the images.
Awesome. That's so good to know, Connor. I hope many of us can come out to see your exhibit.
Yeah, likewise.
And yeah, thank you so much again for sharing all of this with us tonight. You spent so much time on it and have so much to share. So we really, really appreciate it. And
thank you. Yeah, my pleasure.
Hopefully we'll see you in person soon as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And thanks everybody for coming. I can't believe a lot of people came.
Yeah, there were over 100.
I would have been way more nervous if I was in a room of everybody. So it's good that we're doing this. It's kind of weird, but it's also good. So.
You did great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, nice meeting you, Noelle.
You too, Connor.
Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.
All right, bye.